Causes of poverty in the Philippines. Poverty is often caused by unequal access to education and healthcare or natural disasters. The Philippines has the 17th largest economy in the world, but 28% of the population living below the poverty line. The Philippines currently has a low incidence of poverty. This blog post focuses on the causes of poverty in the Philippines having been contributors to economic growth of this country. Poverty, an important economic topic, is not a new phenomenon in the Philippines. Poverty in Philippines caused by corruption. In the Philippines, poverty is a very serious problem caused by corruption, lack of education and health care, political conflicts, and natural disasters. It affects a third of the population and includes 30 million families who earn less than $1.25 a day. Another 10 million families suffer from extreme poverty, with an income of less than $1 per day. Poverty is a major social problem in the Philippines caused by persistent corruption. According to a recent study, 1/3 of Filipinos live on less than half a dollar per day. The United Nations International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, said that poverty in the country is widening at an alarming rate, despite impressive economic growth over the past years. Causes of poverty in the Philippines. Poverty in Philippines caused by lack of good jobs. The state of being poor, a condition of life so lacking in material possessions or advantages as to inhibit one's happiness. Inequality of income and wealth. Lack of resources available to fulfill basic needs, food, shelter, education. The Philippine government estimates that more than 40% of the population live below the poverty line. This is caused by a number of factors, including lack of good jobs, poor public education and healthcare, and natural calamities. A poverty profile of the Philippines identifies key causes and effects of extreme poverty in the country. It covers an overview of formal labor arrangements, employment situation, and poverty, as well as a discussion of factors that contribute to it and recommendations for reducing it. Poverty in Philippines caused by weather/climate change. Climate change results in a variety of impacts, such as sea level rise, more extreme weather events, higher temperatures, and changes in precipitation patterns. According to the Global Climate Risk Index 2018 report prepared by German Watch and Climate Analytics, Philippines ranked 5 among the countries that experienced calamities in 2017. At this point, the causes of poverty and how it can be solved are quite controversial. Some argue that poverty is an issue that can only be solved by improving the economy. Others point to the simple fact that harsh weather conditions in some areas have caused them to become poor, and therefore it is only logical that reducing climate change will benefit these areas. Finally, some focus on the fact basic human rights are being violated in many poor communities, and even though providing money may help solve the problem, this doesn't take away from more important issues such as basic human rights. Poverty in Philippines caused by social injustice. Among the 20 million living in the Philippines, many are forced to live below or just within poverty lines. The economy of Philippines is heavily based on agriculture, fishing and aquaculture, mining and the service sector. Despite being rich in natural resources, the poverty incidence in Philippines is still very high, even if World Bank estimated it to be only 29.7% in 2009. The primary reason for this high incidence of poverty is due to unequal distribution of income across households due to a few factors like social injustice and misallocation. The conflict in the southern Philippines has affected thousands of civilians. Many have been made homeless, and several others have not been able to support their families. The continuing fighting has prevented millions from earning a living through productive means for multiple years. Because many citizens are either too old or too young to work, children are forced to take on the responsibilities of families who are unable or simply not strong enough to support themselves. Families often camp out near military posts or in other public places. However, they do not always have access to food, water, and other necessities. The Philippines are the largest source of migrants leaving Pacific Island nations to seek better opportunities in New Zealand. Many Filipinos in New Zealand are well-established and highly qualified professionals working as doctors, nurses, accountants and engineers. They often sponsor family members to join them in New Zealand as live-in caregivers, for jobs that pay hundreds of dollars more annually than what can be earned in Philippines. Poverty in Philippines caused by lack of food and water. According to World Bank report of 2013, the proportion of Filipino people in poverty, under $1.25 a day, is approximately 21%. Pinoy poverty line is higher than most other poor country or underdeveloped countries because most of the poorest Filipinos are living in rural areas and they need additional resources to survive. The major cause of poverty in Philippines is lack of food and water. Lack of food and water are major causes of poverty in the Philippines. Many people are unable to afford their basic needs such as food and drinking water. Children, who make up a quarter of the Philippines' population, suffer tremendously due to the lack of nutrition they receive and are most susceptible to diseases. This leads to a worsening situation that can be fatal in a lot of cases. Poverty in Philippines caused by lack of government support. It is truly amazing how certain people can adapt to such degrading circumstances. The incidence of severe poverty in the Philippines has been a national issue since the late 1980s, and while government aid programs have helped alleviate cases of extreme poverty, millions of people still live in it. Poverty in the Philippines is a problem attributed to the destruction of agriculture that was caused by the military conflicts throughout the different islands, also due to corruption, politics, and failure of civic leaders. The majority of residents lived below or just above the poverty line. In order to save our planet for future generations, we need to reduce the causes of poverty in the Philippines. Poverty in Philippines caused by inequality. Poverty remains a major challenge in the Philippines. At 20.6%, as of 2009, it is a serious threat to social, political, and economic stability in this country. Inequality further aggravates poverty, which affects the majority of Filipinos and has been growing for the past 3 decades. The Philippines is a country of stark contrasts, with a number of people living in poverty and many more living in relative wealth. An economic boom in the last few years has increased the divide between rich and poor. At least 1.6 million families live below the poverty line, according to government statistics. Poverty refers to the scarcity or the lack of a certain amount of material possessions or money. It applies to both general scarcity and want, and to the state of lacking an ability to acquire goods and services necessary for survival with ease. Inequality is a situation in which the distribution of economic benefits and burdens among members of a group is uneven. Causes of poverty in the Philippines are important to know so that we can control them. Poverty in Philippines caused by lack of education. Despite the fact that the Philippines is a developed country, it has been ranked one of the poorest countries in the world. The poverty in this country is caused by lack of education. The men and women of the Philippines are challenged to provide for their family, since livelihood from farm work does not pay well. Less than 20% of the elementary student population in this country reach high school. Those who will have an opportunity to receive further education are limited. The causes of poverty in Philippines are low skills and education. The Philippine educational system was greatly damaged by the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos, and currently, many Filipino students prefer learning skills that could help them find jobs rather than furthering themselves into education. Inequality, despair, and lack of hope often define the state of being poor in the Philippines. Poverty begins with a lack of quality basic education, which comes from a combination of low school attendance rates, high dropout rates, and low completion rates for many students. Through education, we can combat poverty in the Philippines.